Hello, Decide Your Destiny crew, and welcome to another podcast episode. Today we have got Noah Healy. Noah Healy is a market designer and game theorist working on better economic systems. After training in nuclear engineering, he worked for tech startups at the peak of the dot-com boom. Becoming fascinated by the mathematics of information and computation led to patent work on a better commodity market design. Hey Noah, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me here, Kyle.
Appreciate it. You've got a ton of books there behind you.
Um, let's see. This shelf, I don't know, tons a bit much. There's probably only about, let's see, 25 feet of books on this shelf.
Okay, I was wrong with ton. There you go. Now,
I
now
I
please,
probably do actually own a ton of books. I think the count's around 2,500, and a lot of them are reasonably thick. It's probably closer to two-thirds of a ton, though.
2/3 of a ton. It's important to be accurate. Now, why? How many of those do you read?
Uh, well, not more than five at a time. These behind me here, I've read all of these. There are a few references here and there that I haven't read that are down below, and I've got things like uh, the 1911 Britannica. I haven't read that, and I've got an OED. I haven't read that. Um, I've got probably about 40 or 50 books from the last library sale that I haven't gotten through yet. I'm not really reading as much as I used to back before I had a purpose in life.
Yep. And what sort of genres?
I'm a real sucker for Silver Age science fiction.
Okay.
50s, 60s, kind of, it was still whiz bang, hadn't gone all cyberpunky. I've got some cyberpunk stuff, mostly the older, more classic. I'm also a pretty decent fan of fantasy, and actually have a pretty extensive collection of children's fantasy, which I find very charming and quite readable. Um, uh, I've got a pretty decent salting of the classics. Mystery's not my biggest fan, but I've still got a few Christies here and there. Horror is probably the thing that I have the least of, but I do have a few classic collections like Poe and some of those guys. Um,
Brilliant. Thank you. And can you let us know what a market designer and a game theorist is?
well, game theory was developed in the 20th century, and it's the mathematics of strategy. Uh, the it provides a set of tools to describe the intentions of agents that are collaborating or competing around a common interest. And markets are one of the most game theoretic situations that human beings actually engage in. Um, so the term market designer actually exists outside of just me, but mostly what the current state of the art focuses on is what's known as market micro design. If somebody's thinking about changing a regulation to stiffen or laxen a punishment related to some activity, the micro designer would go in and take a look at what the probable consequences of that would be, whether having a stiffer penalty might discourage more speculation than manipulation and ultimately harm things, or whether it might clean up certain kinds of bad behavior and actually lead to more efficient market design and so on. That's the kind of thing they're concerned with. My basic contention is that entire field is essentially pointless, because what's actually going on is that the markets are better analyzed as physical information systems, the same way that we design things like the earphones that I've got on. And in that pursuit, game theory lets us take a look at the marketplace as in the parlance of the math, a control system that's doing information boosting, signal boosting, and noise cancellation. And so it's about figuring out how to design a set of incentives and machines that enforce those incentives to create a marketplace.
Brilliant. And when we first spoke, we had quite an interesting conversation about, younger kids, like you said, maybe don't have a purpose, have a lot of time for reading, but the next generations, what their, economy structures, career, what they're going to be lining themselves up with. So I'd love to get some of your thoughts on that.
Well, as we were talking about last time, that is the real challenge. Historically speaking, the sort of the primary purpose and cause of culture and society is to train up a next generation to continue the games and stories that have been played before. And there are certain times in history when that becomes impractical or stops happening. And I think it's pretty obvious that we're in one of them right now. The good news is that while in most cases that's bad news, the sort of the civilization runs out its string and just becomes forgotten. In a few cases throughout history, it's because we gain access to new information, new ideas that falsifies the old ideas. And so we have to build new institutions that concord with actual reality because our old institutions didn't. And that process can be scary or painful, but it's also extraordinarily rewarding. And we are the beneficiaries, those of us now living, of many of those struggles in the past that people have gone through to build the kinds of civilizations we currently enjoy. And so for the kids out there these days, the changing breakthroughs, if you will, basically quantum physics, relativity, computational and information mathematics, all of them are public and easily accessible online. So if you've got that time to waste and effort to spend learning, you can learn these sort of most relevant and real subjects in your spare time, or just as what you're going for. And that's basically what happened to me. I worked for a number of tech companies, but also my hobby was learning more about computational mathematics and computer systems. And I left a tech company and explored computational mathematics, mostly without a real thought that I would come up with any kind of serious breakthrough. And I actually did come up with a very serious breakthrough. And so that's the sort of thing that I'm not saying that, every one of the billions of kids out there has a real chance of changing fundamentally how the entire world functions, but it's a lot more likely than it sounds, because of just how extreme the opportunities are and how big the levers are and how heavy the counterweights are these days. The ability to exploit an already existing globalized communication system in order to gather pretty much all of the best work of all of the smartest people who ever lived, and be able to marinate your brain in that, provides some real opportunities to find very different things to move the ball forward.
And I guess the big part of all of that is the implementation stage, because I've had a coach or someone in the past, and they've kind of pointed out, okay, are you just, what is it called? Intellectual, you know, porn, or is it just, I'm just learning, I'm learning, or I'm stuck in as you're going along the stage of your growth of evolving as a student or someone coming out of university and now out in the real world. We spend so many years and so much time, especially in our traditional, education systems, learning to fill out an exam or to seem more intellectually smart or to be graded as more intellectually smart. But that doesn't necessarily generate someone who goes out and creates a product that helps people or creates a service that helps people. And I guess in today's day, what would you say about the fact that you can implement things? You don't have to go and study endlessly away and then go, okay, well, now I need the opportunity. Okay, I'm not in the right class. Like information and education was very class bound back in the day. And now it's become, dispersed. I know even I've heard of in games where people have sent information and books and different sort of things through digital games, that countries that were blocked from receiving that sort of information and were told about, the other country that they're bad people, but were able to get information through actual online gaming. So it's become very, liberated. A lot of us can have, our hands onto information. But then the big question I have is, what next? What do we do with that information?
Yeah. Well, a few things. So one, it's a real shame that pedagogy has gotten away from its productive roots. One of the weirder things about the modern lecture system is that it isn't modern at all. It actually goes back to the Middle Ages and was developed as effectively an alternative to the printing press because the printing press hadn't been invented. And so the notion was that there was a book of knowledge. The professor who had written that book, possibly, from his own lectures, would read out the book of knowledge to the students who would, by taking notes, create their own textbooks, which they could then go back home or wherever they were going to find themselves with. And that was that very laborious process. And of course, if you write your own textbook while it's being dictated to you, that's a very, intellectual way to acquire knowledge. That's the standard note-taking thing that they kind of teach you as study skills. So that was how knowledge was being promulgated. One of the interesting things for me, for the split between sort of the academic and productive with computation, which is why it's to some extent really picked me up, is that computers, and particular things like compilers and other computer programs that do these things, are a radically harsher judge of your ideas and thinking than any teacher ever could be. The computer, when you write a computer program, it's perfectly happy to just do nothing or act crazy or bomb your entire, system and brick it, if you did something that was dumb that you did not realize was dumb. And so, from that front, the learning and building become simultaneous activities. And so that's where I would say for people that are engaged, the way that you stop these ideas and thinking from just being some kind of like armchair intellectual meaningless exercise, is by accepting the discipline of implementation and checking and testing. And that's what's really fascinating about computational math specifically, is that computational math is the mathematics of imagination, and it provides us the set of tools, compilers being one of them. And if you own a computer, you actually do own a compiler, although in some cases it's much harder to get at than it really ought to be. That tool exists that can turn that machine into, within its physical limits, whatever you can imagine. And so learning how to use that set of tools to be able to transform your machine in these ways becomes the breaking point, if you will, of whether your imagination is just some sort of nonsensical fever dream or an actual breakthrough that can build the world around you.
Yeah, wow. And can you, I guess, talking about the world, can you let us know a little bit more about nuclear engineering, your time in nuclear engineering?
Yeah, sure. So, I got to UVA. I went for the engineering school because I'm kind of dyslexic and have horrifying writer's block, and figured I'd have to write less there, which turned out to be false.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, so I get into engineering school, which I'd been in for a couple of years actually, because my high school I'd finished out the math, so they were sending me over there anyway. And at they get us together first semester and like, okay, at the end of the semester you have to declare a major. And I was like, okay, let's see what's out there. I didn't really have a plan. I was just like, I'm good at solving math problems. I'm not good at basically everything else. I need to earn a living someday. Engineering seems to be a good path.
Yeah, definitely.
So anyhow, I look around at the different subject matter, and they're all pretty gung ho. The material science people are like, material science is the foundation of human civilization, and it's the enabler for all technologies. Come on down. And the chemical engineering people are basically say the same thing, and so does everybody else. And then there's the engineering science folks, and they say, yeah, we're here because we've got these graduate programs and we don't have undergraduate programs for them. And then some people develop their own program because they want to do some other kind of thing, graduate school. They haven't quite made up their mind. And I was like, I haven't quite made up my mind. So I jump into engineering science, and I'm just kind of exploring, which is actually explicitly not allowed, but I was very smart, and my advisor in engineering science basically was like, well, you're smart, you must be making good decisions. So I kind of followed around professors. I would sort of take an exploratory, like, junior level class in a subject to see if there was anything interesting there. And when I found good professors, I would follow them into other things that they taught, and just was like, hey, this guy's a good teacher in X. Let's see what he actually teaches. Let's find out what's going on over there. So one of my good professors from my sort of engineering core classes was in the nuke department, and he was teaching a course on reactor safety. So I was like, oh, I'll go take reactor safety. Who cares? Like, I'm just adding up credits here. And during that class, he gave a lecture, which led to me coming up with this entirely harebrained sci-fi reactor, in order to prove a statement that he said was not factually correct, which it wasn't, but not for the reasons I was claiming. But I presented it to him after the class, and he's like, that's a bizarre and fantastic idea, but it's the kind of thing that you can turn into a senior thesis. Let me introduce you to my buddy, and maybe he could be your thesis advisor. So he did. And so then I'm talking to this other guy, and he's like, that's obviously nonsense, but there's some features there that are actually similar to this real thing that you've never heard of before, that people have actually built before, and it's really awesome. And I have a PhD student that's building a computer program that simulates one of these things, and it actually has the properties of the system that that you designed was trying to have. So, like, you are right, but not for any of the reasons you said. And so if you wanted to like make this idea, and he proposed this idea of doing some research on how to extract a mathematical model from a computer program model, that would be a pretty good thesis topic, and I'd be your advisor. And so I took a class with him, and took some other classes in the nuclear department, and he was my thesis advisor and got that going. Got the thesis done, and he said, "Hey, this is great. They're shutting down the nuclear department, so we've got some grant money kicking around. If you would like to go to graduate school for a year, I'd pay for it. So if you can talk the administration into letting you in, I'll give you a free year of grad school." And so I went to the administration and said, "Hey, what do you think? It's the check's already waiting. If you want to cash it, what would the requirements be?" And so they told me to go take the GRE, and the engineering subject test GRE. So I went and took those, and did pretty good, actually. I got a much higher score on the engineering GRE than you're supposed to get, and they let me in for a year.
And what sort of work did you do when you were in?
Kind of similar, actually. So one of the classes I took in nuclear engineering was actually decision analysis, which is yet another game theoretic class that I took. But I took some other classes on reactor design. There's something called transport theory. There's actually two different things called transport theory. One in the operations research side of the world, which basically has to do with if you've got like some set of physical mass and you need that set of physical mass to be someplace else, what's the best way to transport that set of physical mass? But the transport theory that's important to nuclear engineering has to do with neutron flow. So in one sense, radiation can be modeled as flowing around, but in other senses, that's not really a very good model because radiation is extremely high energy and can move very, very quickly. And so, like when you're modeling how, say, scent spreads through a room from perfume, you use something called diffusion theory. And that's because the perfume atoms are about the same, or molecules are roughly in zone with the size of regular air molecules, and they bounce off each other, and they're a lot bigger, so they move a lot slower, and that's why the perfume doesn't spread everywhere almost instantly. But in general, there's this sort of basic pattern of how it blows up. But if you were to use that same model for how a hard radiation source in a room would spread, that would be completely insane because the hard radiation source would sleet out like a light bulb. But unlike the light from a light bulb, because it can go into solid mass and other things and can scatter and bounce off multiple times, there's this sort of halfway between radiation and diffusion model, and that's what transportation theory is about.
Well, I'd love to take us to a question that I always like to ask on podcasts, which would be, what does deciding your destiny mean to you?
Well, destiny definition is endpoint. And so that to me would be planning your future. I think that there's a lot of thinking and value in planning your future, and many people advocate for it. I almost certainly should do it radically more than I actually do, because I very much dislike doing that. Um, I I'm trying to spend more of my life grappling with these interesting problems, which requires me to be able to have most of my resources focused on the present. Uh, but but the the fact is that we are sort of conscious beings stuck in time, and so for the vast majority of us, the future is a reality, and it's the kind of thing that we need to work towards. Intriguingly, the way my market design actually functions is by putting time into the system explicitly and effectively turning planning for the future into an activity for the present. So there's a well-known thing called Conway's law, where all designs recapitulate the communication of the of the uh, of the design team. So the classic example is that if you have a car and the people designing the wheel and the people designing the axle never talk to each other, then the axle and the wheel won't attach to each other in the car. But there's also a fairly classic notion, I think Nietzsche had it, that all of philosophy is actually autobiography, and that people reveal who they are themselves through their thoughts and ideas. And so this system of turning the future into something that you can concentrate on in the present, and then the future takes care of itself through this present action, is very much the sort of way I think about things.
Well, it's a soothing way for sure. Brilliant. Well, Noah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I just wanted to ask, where could our audience follow more of your journey and some of the things that you've done, and yeah, get in touch or check in? Where could they go? Where could you lead them?
Oh, absolutely. So for those interested in my marketplace, there's a number of information sources online. I can send you like links to videos and white paper, but there's also the website at coordisc.com, COORDISC. People who want to connect to me on LinkedIn, I'm Noah Healy there, or in person, Noah P. Healy at Yahoo. Another point is that I am struggling with the patent office over this patent, and there's a petition out on change.org under CDM patent. And if you're interested in listening to my voice some more, or you'd like to hear me discussing AI and its future impacts on all of us, I co-host a podcast with the former CTO of Reddit, a guy named Marty Wiener, and that's at The Fourth Age, the AI Revolution. And we're on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and about half a dozen other platforms. So that should be relatively easy to find as well.
Brilliant. I'd highly suggest people checking that out to help navigate their future and work out, where this wild world is going. But thank you again. Appreciate it. And guys, as always, remember, decide your destiny. Cheers.